That is because it is their history too, and they know it. Betha continued. While Christians were led in this land, at the time of our ancestor Calgark, they took the faith. They were selfish, wanting an everlasting life beyond this. You can only balance what you have. She passed the bag of loosely tied herbs and plants to Finn, who sat on the sand, organizing them. They know it, because we are one people, those of us who, those centuries before, resisted. The Neills did not resist and reap the rewards of trying to forget about the gods by aligning themselves with the church. Money, power, land, they suffer for it, and know it, too. Do prayers heal wounds? Do stories of righteousness send the dead across peacefully? Betha put her arm round Finn, and the boy placed every wood, leaf, flower and root back into the crudely fashioned bag. They turned to go. "Wait!" shouted Osrith. The woman turned. "Do you have a medicine that will resist a child?" she asked hurriedly, her voice dropping low. "A medicine to be taken to prevent children after lying with a man?" She saw Betha's brow wrinkle. "That can be done?" Osrith pressed. "That can be done," Betha confirmed. "Yet. You should never be undertaken with frivolity or carelessness. The bond between a mother and child should not be severed without good cause. It is costly, though I do not mean just silver." She flashed a smile to Osrith. "Permit us some of that weed and it is yours." Osrith reached into the basket and held out a generous handful. She had silver, but did not want to offend the heathen woman. Returning with so little would probably get her a beating, but the old cook's arms mostly missed anyway. "Wait until your next blood, then, dissolve of this lily root a small portion." Betha indicated with her grubby thumbnail a portion no thicker than a grain of wheat, with honey. "Drink just a little each day. You may also find the pain that troubles you is much reduced." Osrith pushed the root into her clothing. "You are very tolerant, for a creation," Betha smiled. "You have not once asked me to mend my ways or step into the light. I am warrior, my mother was of Cumbra land, a Christian." Osrith went to the memory of her aunt, once her mother. "Never offend a heathen, respect their ways. And those in far-off Irian and the far north in Alba were never subjugated by the Latins. They hold the truth." But her mother had only ever whispered this to her, and very rarely, at bedtimes, when she was small, before she was remarried to Elfric. Even then, Osrith had wondered whether they were really her mother's words, or part of her own dreams. "When we travel, we have been to Cumbra land," Betha smiked. "North to the Strathclyde Cymric, south to the West Cymric. Though that land is harsh, the Chrysians there are very pious." "And what will you do with my seaweed and your squid?" Osrith asked, crouching to Finn's level. The boy beamed widely, twinning his mother. "The seaweed brings brightness," the boy recited, "gives health, restores the strength of a warrior. If your heart is troubled," he placed his hand over Osrith's chest, looking serious, "or your blood is maligned, the squid will put this to rights." "Very good, Belash," his mother nodded, putting her arm out to Finn and drawing him to her as he stood. "We must away." And, to Osrith added, "I feel this will not be our last meeting, Osrith." Osrith turned, looking up at the high cliffs she must climb to get to the upper pathway and get back to Doia, thinking about what Betha said. To meet them again now, that would be something. Would they be moving? Would they cross to Alba or Cumbra land or Cymru? If she was with them, then maybe, just maybe. Two figures watched Osrith turn, with her somewhat lighter basket, and walk in the opposite direction to Betha and Finn across the sand. They shouted across to her as she got almost to the top of the rocks that took her to high ground, bringing Osrith's mind back to the present. She turned, to see two warriors. They were young men, yet not as old as Domhnall. They strode in front of her, blocking her path, keeping their pale blue eyes on her as Osrith kept on walking towards them, slower, looking for a way past. Her hand hovered over the hilt of her sword. "You are in Ullaid lands," one said, taller, broader. He leaned in his sword, elbows wide. "Forgive me," Osrith replied. The man would strike, she knew. "You are of the Neill," the second warrior said then, fleet of foot. He was in front of her in seconds. Give me what you have. It belongs to us, that sand belongs to us. Osrith put down her basket carefully. These men were of the Neill's rival faction, occupying land to the east. Were these two men why she, with the ability to fight, sent for Squid? Did Neill know that she was sending her into the land of their enemy? And the heathen? They took your property too, if this is your land, and you are not just trying to rob a humble servant of the fruits of her labor. We let the heathen. They give us reliable healing. We do not let thieving Neill take what they want. The larger men stood close to the first. If this is yours, Osrith said, carefully, pulling out her sword, fight me for it. Fight you? But that was all he could say. Osrith bent, swiftly, then charged at him, shoulder down. The man lost his balance, and she turned, clashing blades with the other. Then, she stamped on the groin of the first, who had indeed fallen. The man howled in pain, but Osrith didn't look, instead dodged a blow from the second, dropping low and slipping between his legs, pulling one towards another. As he toppled, Osrith sprang to her feet, sheathing Fed's sword, and taking up her basket, running away, fast, and not stopping until she knew they had not been followed. As she loped wearily towards the monastery, the line of the river snaking south on which the fortress palace of the Neill stood, another pair of eyes watched her pass by. 88,888,888. All that week, Osrith returned for Squid. Her catch was scant and took a long time to collect enough, delayed as she looked out for the two men who had challenged her and she had fought. A few times she saw the heathen boy, Finn, who was collecting his own squid and other plants, and her heart glowed with her guilty plan. If the heathens were on the move when the squid had stopped coming to the waters, then she could travel with them, over to Northumbria and head south, or Cumrian southwest, by offering them her sword. But it wasn't until 4 days that Bethu appeared with Finn, helping him collect sea pinks from between the rock crevices. "Are you in need of a poultice?" the heathen woman asked, as Osrith approached. When she shook her head, Bethu asked, "Then what could you want of us? When do you travel?" "We do not travel with Christians," she turned coldly away from her. "I do not belong here," Osrith pressed. "I know," Bethu replied, looking out to sea. "You come from over the sea, from Britannic Moor. You have family. You seek family. I have money, I have silver." Bethu seemed to consider this. "Or, my sword?" "I like you," Bethu smiled. "You are complicated." She did not meet the allied men as she climbed the rocks that evening. But, as she strode the path along the river, her tiny figure got larger as she walked. It was Constantine. "I was supposed to come with you," Constantine panted, as he raced to her. "I looked for you." "I went out early," Osrith replied, her heart lower at her rebuttal from the heathen woman, but a glimmer of hope still remained. "Mary followed you and saw you talking to the heathen," she told Aunt Muir. A little further back from Osrith, the troublesome girl grinned in triumph at Osrith's discomfort. "Come on," Constantine urged. "Domhnall wants to see both of us." The stables were not the most fitting part to receive the news, Osrith reflected. Constantine tore past the brown mare, treading in her straw. In the empty stall, at the back, Finoli and Fergus wait already waiting. Past Osrith strode the tall, blonde-haired. "What is this about?" Osrith asked. And in half an hour, she would know. Mac Alpin had been besieged at Dunnottar by a combined army of Strathclyde Cymric and a Pictish army raised from Caithness. He had fought, with the pro-Gaelish monks at his side, having met them with strength at Nrurim, hoping to trap them into below waters. Giric had taken the crown and Constantine's father had been left for the crows, his men forced to change Ulgans. Constantine had stalked out of the stables, shrugging off Osrith's attempts at comfort. And, after all the telling, Domhnall, the next Gael in line for the Pictish throne, seemed to have aged before her eyes. Osrith lay awake until the morning. Images of the king, tall, benevolent, ferocious, and Dunnottar. Of Gleimri, the antithesis of the Neill palace cook, and of the fisherman from Frisier, of her friend, Gert, and his older brother Alf, and of the irascible housekeeper Elassade. And her last thoughts, as dawn broke and Osrith's eyes succumbed to the anesthesia of sleep, were of Saenid, head of the household guard, of his death at the hands of the cunning usurper Giric, for he was the king's most faithful. And how his touch stole her breath away. 88,888,888. There would be 1 or 2 days of the squid in the temperate sea water before they'd use apoeid with the currents to the highland waters. Osrith had not seen the heathen, since Betha had turned her down, and of the allied warriors, nothing at all. Yet still, Constantine, with the obedience of a hound, waited before dawn outside the kitchens and would accompany her to the coast. He had changed since the news of his father, Osrith thought. Gone was the petulant, needy child, who would babble and whine. Now, next to Osrith a young man strode, taller than Osrith, and contemplative. "You do not need to come," Osrith said that morning, as she had said every morning since he had waited for her. "The Norse, allied, heathens," Constantine told her. "And you are not to speak to them." Osrith breathed as they came to where the path narrowed, before it led down the cliffs and out into Thevwide Bay and the North Irish coast. She had hoped the heathens might come back, despite Bethu and her pledge to meet in 2 moons' time. Guilt plagued her. She was Domhnall's man, though he wouldn't take her oath. He cared for her and treated her with respect, like he did for Tadg and Fergus and Finolai. Well, not exactly like Finolai. How could she even think to leave his side and travel with the heathens? Domhnall had offered to find her a husband, someone Gaelish, and that she could work for Muir and the king, and find Leith. But she did not belong here. She would be humped, and what was humping other than lying down and your lover pushing up and down? And she would be trapped and might never reach Utad. That golden light in her mind telling her where he was would dim and fade. And she would come with child, and most likely die as it was born. And, if she didn't move fast, Osrith knew, for she had had little opportunity to search the monk's correspondence by going to the sea each day, Utad may not remain in Wessex. When they had climbed down the rocks, and onto the sand, rather than wait for her harvest the strand, Constantine pulled her towards him. She dropped her basket in surprise. "Kiss me, Osrith," Constantine commanded. Impetuously, Osrith approached the prince, leaning forward, and looking into his pale grey eyes. Then, she pecked him on the forehead. "No," he demanded, stalking towards her. Then he seized her wrists, so she could not threaten him with feather sword, pressing her back towards the cliff face. He pushed his face close to her, then his lips to hers. Osrith kissed him back, hating herself for liking it, and liking Constantine for daring to get what he wanted. But this must not last. He was betrothed to a Neill princess, as Domhnall was. He would, in time, reclaim his father's throne for Domhnall and would have sons with the same ambition he had, that his Shaena, Saenid Mac Alpin had, to rule all of Alba, subsuming Pitland, Strathclyde, Caithness and Fortriu under one king, and reclaiming Bernicia down to the wall. They often spoke of it and, daily, plans were discussed, laid and relayed. Neither of them heard 2 pairs of footsteps approach from above and, until one of the young allied warriors had struck Constantine in the stomach and held him fast by both of his arms, neither of them realized they were being hunted. Osrith withdrew her sword. The bigger warrior shook his head. "Will not fight you," he spat, holding an arm to Osrith's shoulder, and pushed her back harshly towards the wall. "We will fight him. My brother has some vengeance to redress," the younger warrior added, holding Constantine tightly around the throat. Osrith made to duck under the bigger warrior's arm, but he pushed her past. "He will fight me, you will fight my brother." "No," protested Constantine. "I will fight both of you," declared Osrith, "like I did last time." She saw Constantine's eyes widen. Then, the bigger warrior took out his sword, and held it close to Constantine's crotch. "You fight both of us, and win," the warrior said, twisting his face, grotesquely, "or the prince of the Neill will be the last of his direct line." "Thagalada," Constantine shouted back at him. "She is very strong." Surprise crossed the big warrior's face as he turned back to Osrith. A slow, lazy smirk illustrating his features. She? He took the hand pressing Osrith to the rock, and trailed it down her face. Boy Heech, mocked the other one, and to Constantine, asked, pulling back on his arms, does she hump well? You have no need to fight, sweetheart, the bigger warrior cooed. Keep your prince, but hand over that mighty sword of yours. You want this? Osrith cooed back, but it had been a feint, and she had slipped under the bigger warrior's arm. It was now he who was pinned against the rock, fed a sword's tip to his throat. Touch the prince, and I will kill him, she told the smaller allied warrior. Uncertainty flashed over the man's features, and he loosened his grip on Constantine, at which point, Constantine Macked fought. He fought, and fought, kicking and jabbing and punching, Osrith watching the pent-up grief of his father and his lost kingdom leave him, not caring what blows he sustained in return. But the bigger warrior knew some tricks, and seized Fed's sword, twisting it out of Osrith's hand. He flung her to the floor, but Osrith twisted the sword, the warrior landing awkwardly on her leg as she grappled with it with her crippled left hand. Swiftly, painfully, Osrith pulked her leg out, avoiding being pulled back over by their warrior's grasp, which clutched at nothing as she rolled away. He lunged again, and this time, Osrith struck out at the allied, his arm swinging back against the rock as he screamed in agony. At her feet fell his little finger, and next to it, fed a sword. Constantine and Osrith scaled the rock path as the smaller allied consoled the larger, blood-staining the sand. They did not stop running until they reached the river, the monastery and the palace, tearing past a ferocious Domhnall, screaming insults at them as they went.